Don't worry, he typed, the glow of his screen lighting his smirk. She's too broke to join us anyway. The words hit before I realized they were public. A full thread beneath it, laughing reactions, little flame emojis, friends chiming in like it was all some harmless joke. I stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by people who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. What struck me wasn't the insult. It was the ease with which he delivered it. Like humiliation was a language he'd been fluent in for years. He didn't look up when I stepped into the room, didn't sense the shift in the air, didn't notice the silence that wrapped itself around us like a curtain lowering on a stage. Did you see it? He asked, still scrolling, still grinning at his own cleverness. I didn't answer. My voice would have betrayed too much. So I just watched him, calm, steady, unblinking, as if I were memorizing something I'd need later. His posture, his certainty, the casual cruelty he wore like cologne. He thought he was untouchable. He finally looked up then, and for the first time, his smile faltered. Maybe it was the way I stood too still, too composed. Maybe it was the realization that my silence wasn't confusion, but clarity. He cleared his throat. It was just a joke. The guys thought I raised a hand, not to silence him, but to save myself from hearing the rest. Because in that moment, something inside me quietly aligned. Not anger, not humiliation, just a clean, precise understanding. He had no idea who he was speaking about, no idea who he was speaking in front of, and absolutely no idea what doors I could open or close. I set my phone down gently, like placing a marker on a map, and for the first time that night, I smiled. A small one, measured, almost kind. I think that unsettled him more than anything I could have said, because what happened next would rewrite the entire pitch day, and he still had no idea who he was really dealing with. The aftermath didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came in something softer and awkward, stretching silence that seemed to follow him from room to room. He kept glancing at me like I was a mirror he didn't want to look into, but couldn't avoid. He tried to act normal at first, a brush of the hand on my shoulder, a forced laugh when his phone buzzed again with notifications from that same humiliating post. But each vibration felt like a reminder of a line he couldn't uncross. People know it's a joke, he murmured as he poured coffee he didn't drink. They won't take it seriously, I nodded, but not in agreement. More like acknowledgement. Yes, I heard the words leaving his mouth. No, I wasn't offering them any shelter. He kept talking anyway, trying to patch a crack with words that dissolved before they reached me. He didn't apologize, not once. He danced around the idea of remorse, but never stepped into it. That would require him to admit he'd aimed the joke at me, not the world. By afternoon, he grew restless. He paced more, checked his phone compulsively, deleted comments, reposted stories of grind mode and focus culture as if masking insecurity with hustle slogans would undo the damage. What he didn't realize was this: I wasn't hurt anymore, not in the way he expected me to be. Something had shifted beneath the surface, subtle, quiet, irreversible. A kind of emotional tectonic plate rearranging itself into something steadier than before. His words had carved out a space inside me, but instead of pain, something colder and clearer settled into the hollow. I watched him rehearse for pitch day later that evening. He stumbled through his slides, reciting them as if the right sequence of words could convince investors he believed in his own idea. But his voice cracked whenever it grazed confidence. He felt me watching, and each time our eyes met, he looked away first. The balance had changed, though he didn't know how or why. Not yet, because while he was busy rehearsing his pitch, I was quietly preparing for something far more decisive, and he would never see it coming. That night, I lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep, listening to the uneven rhythm of his breathing. He slept like someone who believed the worst was already over, as if my silence meant forgiveness, as if the damage he caused had evaporated the moment he stopped talking about it. His certainty used to comfort me once. Now it only clarified the distance between us. I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible lines, timelines, decisions, the quiet hinge moments where partnerships either deepen or fracture. We had crossed one of those moments earlier, though he hadn't recognized it. He believed humiliation was something you could shrug off, delete, edit out of a feed. But words leave impressions long after they disappear from screens. By morning, he was bouncing again, energy forced but familiar. He kissed my cheek too quickly, told me he hoped I wasn't still weird about the post, as if the entire thing were a mood, not a message. I didn't correct him. There was nothing to correct. Instead, I observed every insecurity he masked, every shortcut he took in his pitch deck, every time he confused confidence with volume. He kept asking for my thoughts, but only the pieces that flattered him. He wanted reassurance, not honesty, and certainly not clarity. So I gave him what he wanted: quiet companionship, a steady presence, a careful neutrality he mistook for support. But inside, something was crystallizing. Not spite, not revenge, just a decision. If he saw me as an accessory to his success, then he would one day learn what it felt like when that accessory stepped quietly out of frame. Later that evening, he tossed me his laptop without looking up. "Check if the financial slide looks clean," he said, already absorbed in another window. But as I scrolled, something flickered behind the numbers. A pattern, a weakness, an opening he didn't even realize he'd created. I closed the laptop slowly, feeling the room settle around me. This wasn't about getting even. It was about reclaiming something he never valued properly: my presence, my intelligence, my place at the table he'd tried to push me away from. And the moment I saw that opening, the entire story shifted, though he still believed nothing had changed at all. The day before pitch day always had a certain electricity to it. Even when he first started the company, back when the entire team was just him, a borrowed laptop, and a list of buzzwords he hadn't yet learned to use correctly. He lived for this one moment, the chance to stand under warm lights and convince strangers he was someone worth believing in. But behind the bravado was something thinner, more fragile, an idea that hadn't fully found itself, wrapped in confidence that hadn't been earned. He thought I didn't understand the world he was stepping into, that being broke, as he'd so publicly phrased it, meant I had no place near the stage, no value in strategic conversations, no insight into investors or what they looked for. He was wrong, of course, spectacularly wrong, but he didn't know that yet. He still believed he was the one carrying us forward. He still believed his pitch deck, messy, inconsistent, stitched together with flair instead of strategy, was enough to impress people who had seen hundreds before it. He thought charm could substitute for structure and momentum would make up for missing data. And the investors? He had no idea I knew two of them personally. Old colleagues, people I'd built trust with long before he decided I belonged in the audience, not the arena. I never told him, not because I wanted the upper hand, but because he never asked. He never imagined I could hold something he needed. As he rehearsed in the living room, pacing in circles, arms slicing through the air as if enthusiasm could somehow reshape logic, I sat quietly at the table watching, noting every gap in his narrative, every unconvincing line. The pitch wasn't ready, not even close, but he wasn't worried. He believed he was irresistible. He believed the world loved confidence the way he did. It was almost strange, witnessing that level of certainty. Not envy, not admiration, just a kind of distant curiosity. Because by then, I already understood something he didn't. He was walking into that room alone, and I wasn't sure he realized how dangerous that could be. What happened when pitch day finally arrived would expose more than he ever intended and far more than he was prepared for. The realization didn't arrive in a dramatic flash. It surfaced slowly, like a quiet truth rising through deep water. He had built his identity on the belief that he was the visionary and I was the spectator, that he was the one climbing and I was the one being pulled along. He never questioned that hierarchy, never imagined it could be anything but true. But as I watched him rehearse once more, voice to loud, statistics to thin, ego filling all the empty spaces, I felt something uncoil inside me. Something steady, something old. I had spent years in rooms he'd never stepped foot in. I had sat across from investors who could see through facades in seconds. I had learned how to speak in numbers, not vibes. Outcomes, not promises. He didn't know that. He never asked. He never thought he needed to. To him, my background was a footnote. A job he didn't fully understand, and therefore undervalued. A career that kept our lives afloat, that funded his early prototypes, his software subscriptions, his late-night experiments that often ended in broken hardware or frustrated silence. He didn't see any of it, but the investors did. They always had. 2 of them still emailed me occasionally updates, questions, invitations to events I never mentioned at home because the conversations with him rarely had room for my world. They knew my insight, my evaluations, my ability to see what survived scrutiny. That wasn't arrogance. It was history. Still, I had never used that history for anything but building stability. Until now. That evening, while he went out to clear his head, I sat at my desk and reopened his pitch deck. This time, I wasn't just reviewing it. I was studying it, its weaknesses, its potential, the story buried beneath his bravado. With every slide I reshaped in my mind, a strange calm settled over me. Not triumph, not anticipation, just clarity. There was a better version of this idea, sharper, honest, structurally sound. A version he would never be able to deliver because he never bothered to understand the backbone of his own vision. And I realized something simple, undeniable. The pitch didn't need him, not the way he imagined. And once that truth settled, the path ahead became unmistakably clear, though he still believed the stage belonged only to him. The shift happened so subtly that even I almost missed it. It began with a single email, not a bold announcement, not a declaration of intent, just a quiet, measured message to an old colleague, someone who once told me, "If you ever have something worth hearing, my door is open." I never thought I'd knock. But that night, as the house hummed in its usual patterns and he laughed from the other room at a video he'd probably use as a motivation clip in his pitch, I typed 3 sentences that carried more weight than any confrontation ever could. A simple request: would you spare 10 minutes tomorrow before the presentations begin? I'd like your opinion on something. I didn't attach a deck. I didn't mention him. I didn't even hint at a pitch. I wanted no advantages, only clarity. When I hit send, the quiet in the room changed. It felt like a door shifting open somewhere inside me. Meanwhile, he continued pacing, rewriting sentences that didn't need rewriting, searching for quotes that sounded wise but meant nothing. He was polishing the surface of something whose foundation he never examined. I watched him for a moment. He was so certain the world revolved around the story he'd built about himself. So certain that humiliation, mine, not his, was just incidental debris on his path to greatness. "Wish me luck," he said before bed, offering a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I wished him steadiness, not luck. But I didn't speak it aloud, because by then, I'd realized something. He didn't listen unless the words served him, and I had none of those left to give. The next morning, I dressed plainly. Neutral colors, nothing loud, just presence, quiet, grounded, in contrast to the frantic energy he radiated from the passenger seat as we drove to the venue. He didn't ask why I came. He assumed I was there to sit in the back row, to watch, to clap. He hadn't noticed the laptop in my bag, or the flash drive, or the printed notes folded neatly beside them. He had no reason to believe I had a purpose beyond supporting his. And that was the beauty of being underestimated. Because my move was already in motion, and by the time he sensed it, I would be standing somewhere he never thought I belonged. The venue buzzed with the kind of tension that only ambition can create: restless, hungry, electric. Founders paced hallways reciting numbers under their breath. Investors murmured to each other behind half-closed doors. The air smelled faintly of coffee, nerves, and the faint metallic scent of anticipation. He thrived in places like this, or at least, he believed he did. The moment we stepped inside, his posture changed, shoulders squared, chin raised, voice suddenly sharper as he greeted people who barely recognized him. He threw names around like confetti, trying to stitch himself into conversations that weren't meant for him. Meanwhile, I moved through the space quietly, almost invisibly. Not because I was hiding, but because invisibility is a skill one you learn after enough years of being spoken over, dismissed, or gently sidelined by the very people you've helped stand upright. It was easy to slip away. Investors barely glanced at the founders unless their schedules demanded it. Assistants guarded doors with practiced indifference. And within those controlled intersections of access, I navigated effortlessly, not out of boldness, but familiarity. My 10-minute meeting took place in a quiet side room, round table, frosted glass, muted lighting. My colleague walked in with the same steady smile he used in boardrooms. "I heard you have something for me," he said. I didn't hand him the pitch. Not yet. Instead, I spoke about the market gap, the problem worth solving, the human story behind the numbers. I talked in calm, precise terms, outlining a structure he recognized as the foundation of real investment potential. Only then did I open my laptop. Not to show my partner's deck, his sloppy masterpiece of wishful thinking, but the restructured version. The one built from understanding, not performance. The one he never asked me to help shape. My colleague's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Interest, recognition, respect. "This is solid," he said softly. "Very solid. Who's presenting this today?" I met his question with silence. Not evasive, just measured. He leaned back slowly, a new thought forming behind his eyes. A thought that would change the trajectory of the entire morning. Before he could speak again, my phone buzzed. A message from my partner. "Where are you?" "They're calling the next group." I closed the laptop. Because in that moment, the balance of power completed its shift. And when I walked out of that room, one truth settled in the air. They thought they knew who was pitching today. But by the time they realized the truth, it would already be too late. Pitch day rooms always carry the same quiet arrogance, rows of chairs angled toward a small stage. Soft lighting meant to flatter anxious faces. Investors seated like a tribunal with notebooks open and expressions carved from patience and steel. He loved this environment. He fed on it. When I returned from my meeting, he was already at the front of the prep area, animatedly gesturing through his final run-through with two acquaintances who nodded politely but checked their watches when he wasn't looking. "There you are," he said, breathless, relief blooming across his face as if my presence existed to anchor him. "They're seating everyone. Just sit near the front, okay? I want you to see this," he meant. See me. Validate me. Witness my greatness. I simply nodded. Because the irony was almost painful, he had no idea how much of the room already knew my name, even if they hadn't connected it to me yet. No idea how many eyes I had quietly passed, how many small acknowledgments had already unfolded behind closed doors. We took our seats, him at the founders section, jittering with adrenaline. Me a few rows back, steady and unhurried. One after another, startups presented. Polished, chaotic, brilliant, forgettable, each founder offering their best attempt at being undeniable. Then his name was called. He inhaled sharply, smoothed his shirt, and walked onto the stage with that familiar swagger, chin high, smile wide, confidence stitched too tightly into every gesture. He began speaking before the room had fully settled. Too fast, too loud, trying too hard. I watched the investors' faces, small flickers, confusion at an unclear problem statement, hesitation at inflated projections, polite interest dissolving into quiet skepticism. They weren't cruel. They weren't dismissive. They were simply unconvinced. His voice wavered when the first question landed, sharp, targeted, the kind that tests whether the speaker has depth beneath the script. He didn't, and for the first time, he sensed it. His eyes drifted toward me, seeking reassurance, a lifeline, something to tether him back to the version of reality where he was brilliant and the room simply needed to catch up. but all I offered was stillness, not coldness, just truth. What he didn't know was that the stage would not be his last today, because the moment he stepped down, breathless and shaken, the real pitch, the one built on clarity, integrity, and a story investors already trusted, was waiting for its turn. And when I rose from my seat, the room shifted in a way he could no longer ignore. He stepped off the stage with the look of someone who had just woken from a dream and couldn't remember whether he'd been flying or falling. His smile was strained. His hands trembled slightly. He kept nodding to no one, trying to absorb the fragments of confidence that had slipped through his fingers. "Be honest," he whispered when he reached me, breath shallow. "Was it okay?" But the investors' faces had already answered that for him. Before I could respond, an assistant approached, clipboard in hand, tone perfectly neutral. "Are you ready?" she asked. My partner blinked. "For what?" Her gaze shifted to me. I stood. He frowned, confusion tightening his features. "Wait, why is she?" But I didn't speak. "Not yet." The assistant guided me toward the wings of the stage, her voice low but warm. "Your deck is already loaded," she said. They seemed very interested. My partner's voice cracked behind me. "Her what is loaded?" I paused just long enough to meet his eyes. Not with triumph, not with cruelty, just calm clarity, the kind he'd never learned to recognize. He took a step toward me. "What are you doing?" For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Because here is what he was finally realizing. I had never been standing behind him. I had been standing beside him. And he had spent years looking in the wrong direction. But the true break wasn't his fear. It was the dawning understanding that this moment, my moment, had not been improvised out of spite. It had been earned. When I walked onto the stage, the lighting felt different. Not warmer, not brighter, just honest. Investors straightened in their seats. Some exchanged subtle nods as recognition clicked into place. The colleague who'd emailed, the quiet strategist they'd once trusted, the woman they now realized was the real architect of what they'd heard earlier. I took a breath, steady and unhurried. "Good afternoon," I began softly. "I'd like to tell you a clearer version of a familiar story," and the room leaned in, every posture shifting toward me instead of away. Behind the lights, I could feel him watching. Not with anger, with dawning, irreversible understanding. Because as the first slide illuminated the screen, he finally realized the pitch he thought belonged to him was never truly his at all. The room was quiet, not the brittle, uncomfortable quiet that follows a mistake, but the anticipatory stillness that comes before something unexpected. A shift in gravity, a collective inhale. My first slide glowed onto the screen, clean and restrained, not loud, not embellished, just intentional. I didn't rush, didn't perform. I simply spoke the truth of the idea, its origin, its potential, the gap it filled, not in theory but in lived reality. I described the people it would impact, the inefficiencies it could solve, the way the market's overlooked corners often hid the strongest opportunities. As I spoke, the investors changed. Their pens lowered, their eyes sharpened, their posture leaned forward, that small but unmistakable sign that they were no longer evaluating, they were engaging. Every slide had a purpose. Every number had grounding. Every projection had evidence instead of wishful thinking. And unlike him, I didn't hide uncertainty. I acknowledged it, framed it, turned it into strategy rather than weakness. This investors understood. This they trusted. Questions came quickly. Real ones, hard ones. I answered each with calm precision, not memorized, not rehearsed, but rooted in the years I'd spent understanding how systems worked, what people valued, and what it meant to build something that could survive scrutiny. At one point, an investor asked, "Who developed this revised approach?" For a moment, the theater lights hummed louder. I let the silence stand. Not to expose him, but to honor the truth. "I did," I replied. Quietly, over time. "It's a structure I believe in." A few investors nodded, as though a missing puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. Behind the lights, I could feel his breath catch, felt the tremor of realization radiating from where he stood pressed against the wall. A man watching not the theft of his moment, but the revelation of mine. I closed with a single sentence, steady and unforced. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to build something that doesn't need impressing. Silence. Then applause, not loud, but focused, intentional. The kind that means we see you. And when the lead investor stood and extended his hand, the room tilted a second time. Because the deal they offered didn't have his name on it, and the moment he saw the contract, he understood the reversal was complete. The investors didn't rush. Real power rarely does. They spoke to me in low, measured tones, clarifying timelines, resources, strategic priorities. Their questions weren't tests anymore. They were invitations. The kind extended only when someone has earned not just interest, but confidence. I answered each one calmly, aware of the growing stillness behind me. He hadn't moved since the applause. Not a step, not a breath loud enough to register. The assistant placed the preliminary agreement in front of me, the paper crisp and impossibly light for how much it carried. I scanned it methodically, without theatrics. It wasn't a performance. It was a decision. When I signed, there was no flourish, just a quiet confirmation of a truth that had been waiting to surface. Only then did I turn toward him. He stood half-shadowed by the backstage curtain, fingers curled around the fabric like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His face was pale, eyes wide with the kind of disbelief that doesn't come from betrayal but from revelation. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Words would have cheapened the moment. After the investors shook my hand, after they exchanged final nods and gathered their notes, he finally stepped forward, voice thin. You took my idea." I met his gaze steady, without cruelty. "No," I said softly. "I refined the one you abandoned." He flinched, not at the content, but at the tone, calm, factual, unshakable. It was the sound of someone who had stopped asking for recognition long ago. He searched my face for anger, triumph, even spite, anything he could use to anchor the narrative he wanted to believe. But I felt none of those. Only clarity. They wanted my pitch, he insisted, voice cracking. "I'm the founder." "They wanted substance," I replied. "And they knew where to find it." He staggered back a step, as if the truth had weight. The irony was almost gentle. He wasn't losing because I had outmaneuvered him. He was losing because he had underestimated the value of the one person who could have helped him succeed. And once you dismiss someone, you lose the right to be surprised when they stand without you. His final whisper trembled. "What happens now?" I didn't answer, because the next steps would reveal themselves without my help. And what happened after we walked out of that room would dismantle the last illusion he had left to cling to. We walked out of the venue together, but the air between us felt like two separate worlds, parallel, close, and utterly unreachable from one another. He stayed half a step behind me, as if unsure whether he was following or being left behind. In truth, the distance had existed long before today. Pitch day had only revealed it under brighter lights. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed the pavement in a soft gold. Cars rolled past. Conversations drifted in the air, mundane, indifferent, untouched by the quiet unraveling happening beside me. He finally broke the silence. "So, this is it." His voice was small, not angry, not accusatory, just lost. I paused, turning to face him fully for the first time since signing the deal. "It didn't have to be," I said gently. "But you made a choice. Not today." "Long before today." He swallowed hard. "I thought you were with me." "I was," I said. "You just never treated me like I was." The truth settled between us like dust in sunlight, visible, undeniable. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had gestured so confidently on stage, now trembling slightly. "I didn't know you were capable of all this." A quiet exhale left me, not relief, not grief, something more like release. "That was never the problem," I said. "The problem was that you never cared to know." His shoulders sagged, not dramatically, just enough to show the weight of a realization he couldn't escape. In the distance, I could still hear investors inside the venue discussing next steps. My name rose softly in their conversations, steady and certain. Not loud, just present. He heard it too. And that was the moment the collapse completed itself, not with shouting or accusations, but with the recognition that his downfall wasn't orchestrated. It was self-inflicted. He stepped back, eyes glassy but dry. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, soft but firm. "Just learn from the silence." For the first time all day, he nodded, not in defensiveness, not in denial, but in acknowledgement of something he could no longer pretend away. I turned to leave, the contract folder tucked lightly under my arm, not as a trophy but as a beginning. Behind me, his voice barely rose above the wind. "I'm sorry, I didn't stop walking. Some things don't need an audience. Some things don't need a reply. And some endings speak for themselves." Because in the end, the lesson was simple. They called me broke once, but now they can't afford to forget me.